Jeremy's Raceway, Chapter 4, The Search Divides. 3 days after Jeremy Newbury disappeared, the search began to divide. The town was still looking for Jeremy. The men from the Raceway were looking for answers. Every evening, the volunteers gathered with flashlights and lanterns. They searched the fields again. They searched the woodlots more carefully. They walked the streams and rivers, hoping to find a living, breathing man. They searched abandoned buildings with more scrutiny. They searched everywhere a man might go or find himself. The construction workers went with them. They walked the same roads, called Jeremy's name, checked the same places everyone else checked. But most of them no longer expected to find him there. They had been the first men on site that morning, and though none of them dared say it aloud, their thoughts had begun drifting less toward finding Jeremy and more toward Emily, the baby, and the family who might soon receive the kind of news no one ever wants to hear. One by one, without ever speaking out loud, they had reached the same conclusion. Jeremy had not left the Raceway. The question was no longer where he was. The question was how it had happened. At night, after the search parties dispersed, small groups lingered around pickup trucks and folding chairs. The conversations were always quiet, always unfinished. Nobody wanted to be the man who said the words, yet everyone circled them. What if he slipped? No. Maybe he climbed down there for something. Jeremy wasn't careless. Then what happened? No one had an answer. The Raceway stood finished behind them, and the sign still towered above the road, and the concrete in the foundation had hardened days ago. Every man who had worked that site found himself staring at those foundations longer than he meant to. Not because he knew Jeremy was there, but because he was beginning to fear that he might be. Investigators had spent 3 days searching for another explanation. They found none. The concrete truck had emptied its load exactly where it was supposed to. The chute had been positioned correctly. The release mechanism had been opened. The concrete had flowed into the foundation as planned. Nothing suggested sabotage or foul play. Yet every answer seemed to lead to the same terrible conclusion. Jeremy had never left the Raceway. On the afternoon of the third day, Ben Carter stood beside the concrete-filled well with Owen Pike and Luke Harper. The 3 men stared silently at the hardened concrete. Years earlier, they had sat together on a steel beam sharing lunch when a weld fell. The beam had dropped. The world had tilted. Death had seemed inevitable. Then Jeremy had appeared, the young assistant foreman with far more courage than experience. He climbed into a crane he had never operated before, and somehow held the unstable beam in place long enough for rescuers to arrive. The town later called him a hero. Jeremy hated the attention, but the 3 men never forgot. Luke finally broke the silence. I keep expecting him to walk around the corner. No one laughed, because they all understood. Owen nodded. Me too. Ben looked toward the giant sign, now standing complete above the foundation. 3 days earlier, it had represented the future. Now it represented something else entirely. He was excited about today. The other 2 men looked at him. Ben swallowed. He talked about his father's face when he saw the sign standing complete. A faint smile appeared. He said he wanted to see his father's face when he saw the sign standing complete. The smile vanished. That's all he talked about. That evening, the church was full of townfolk looking for an explanation only God could answer. The crowd was quiet, waiting to be addressed. waiting for someone to explain the situation. Exhaustion had settled over everyone. After 3 days and 2 nights of almost constant searches, no one had any energy to demand anything. Now only rumors remained, and none of the town wanted to hear. Mayor Newbury stood up at the front of the room. His hat rested in his hands. The room fell silent. For a moment, he simply looked at the crowd. Friends, people he had known his entire life, neighbors, newcomers who had adopted the town as their own. Everyone who could be there was here, seeking answers, seeking reasons. When he finally spoke, his voice sounded older than anyone remembered. "We've searched for 3 days." The room fell silent. "We've searched the woods, the roads, the riverbanks, the fields, abandoned buildings, and every place anyone thought a man might be at some place, and places some could not be." He paused. "We followed every lead." The mayor swallowed. "And we haven't found Jeremy." No one moved. No one needed to hear that part. Everyone already knew. The men at the Raceway have spent the last day trying to understand what happened. His eyes drifted downward. The concrete truck emptied exactly where it was supposed to, but not when it was supposed to. A few workers lowered their heads. The foundation was poured by someone who was alone on the site. More silence. "There's no sign that Jeremy left the site." The words landed heavily. Several people looked toward Emily, who was crying silently, eyes red. Others stared at the floor or at the heavens. The mayor's voice began to tremble. "I've spent 3 days hoping someone would walk through my front door and tell me we missed something." His eyes filled. That Jeremy was hurt. A tear rolled down one cheek. Or lost. He laughed softly through the tears. Maybe even hiding because he was tired of listening to me tell him how to do his job. A few sad smiles appeared. Then his face broke. But after 3 days, he stopped speaking. The church waited. After a moment, he found his voice again. "After everything, we've searched." He looked toward Emily, then to Jeremy's friends. Then he swept over the crowd, settling on his family. "After everything the men at the Raceway have found," his voice barely held together, "I don't believe my son is coming home." The room fell completely silent. Not a cough, not a sniffle, nothing.